Boker Tov, Guten Tag, Guten Morgen, Buenos Dias, Bonjour. Welcome, everybody, to the Aliyah this morning. Tisa, the third Aliyah. We'll be talking today about the Holy Shabbat. My intention is to read some insights here from Rabbi Trugman about the Shabbat, some things, interesting things he has to say, and then we're going to dive into the ancient Mekilta and the Mekilta de Rabbi Ishmael, and we're going to see about the Sabbath, because the Sabbath is, of course, one of the, probably the most important, not probably, excuse me, it is the most important institution that we have in Judaism. Interestingly, you'll notice that throughout history, the despots, the pagans, the, generally wicked people have oppressed the Jews in various time periods. And there are three things that they generally attempt to remove from us. Three specific things. And this is talked about at length in many sources. One of the sources this is discussed in at length is the Art Scroll book that discusses Hanukkah, better known as Hanukkah. But anyway, the three things that all the despots, whether they be Stalin or Hitler or Mao or Caesar or Pharaoh or Antiochus Epiphanes or whatever other despot that you wanted to discuss in history, the three things that they all had in common was they attempted to get the Jewish people, to get us from ceasing to observe the Shabbat, ceasing to perform circumcision, and ceasing to obey the calendar, the festivals, Rosh Chodesh, etc. Those are the three principal attacks against Jews. And this is, again, whether it's the Crusaders and so forth, the Christian kings and so forth and so on, these are the three things. So, if you're watching these videos, and good morning, glad you're here, everybody who's watching, even the people who are watching who don't agree with us, which is, by the way, plenty of people, they watch because they don't agree, and they're shocked and dismayed that we're actually noticing that there's problems. And what's good about that, though, is those self-same people watch this type of program, and then they go and try to refute it. They take the Pepsi challenge, which is got a scripture verse maybe or something in the Gospels that might refute what we're saying, and say, yes, we do. We know we do, because Paul said there was. And they go find it. And of course, it's not there. In fact, not only is it not there, they find the exact opposite. It'll take a minute, but eventually they will come to realize that, nothing Paul says is actually rooted in truth. So anyway, so that's good. But the people who watch us, they disagree right now. They are generally against the Shabbat. They're generally against, not generally against, they are in fact against circumcision. Some of the most vile comments that we've received, by the way, have been in response to our very biblical and extraordinarily godly concept that you need to be circumcised ritually, spiritually, so forth. So people attack Shabbat, they attack the circumcision, they attack the calendar. And what's interesting about that is that those three attacks are shared by, as I said before, Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Karl Marx, Mao, Caesar, Pharaoh, Antiochus Epiphanes. List goes on and on and on. Isn't that interesting? So that begs the question, whose team are you on? Like, King David called Goliath an uncircumcised Philistine. Are you in King David's team or Goliath's team? What jersey are you wearing exactly? This is a question I have, because I look around and say, let's see if my belief system is the Shabbat's been abolished, circumcision has been abolished, the calendar has been abolished. Who else believes that? Oh, Adolf Hitler. Who else believes that? Antiochus Epiphanes, Nero. Who believes that the Shabbat has not been abolished, that circumcision is valid, that the calendar of God, the biblical calendar, the Hebrew calendar, is legit? Who believes that? King David, Ezekiel, Isaiah, King Solomon, Joshua, Moses, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Yeshua, Kepha, Mattiyahu. I wonder what team I need to play on. I mean, listen, we're kind of putting it in simple terms, but isn't that true? By the way, speaking of Ezekiel, are you aware of the verse in Ezekiel where it's talking about the third temple that Ezekiel, let me see if I can find it really quick. Well, I've got you here. I mean, 44:6, I believe it is. Is this it? It's not. It's in 44. I don't remember what verse it is, but in any case, it's talking in there that it actually, I think it's Ezekiel 44. I can't find it on the fly here, but it says that no one will be able to enter into the third and final temple unless you are both circumcised in both your flesh and your heart. Dun, dun, dun. Wait, what? Yeah. So, it's interesting, this whole thing, right? So coming back to the Sabbath, you ever heard Christian people or you ever heard any messages that talk about that tithing is still legitimate because it was given before the law? Anybody ever heard that? And they point to Abraham giving a tithe to Melchizedek. Well, of course, that statement is fundamentally false because the book of Genesis is actually part of the law of Moses. So therefore, tithing was not given before the law. Indeed, the law existed before there was existence. John 1:1. But putting that aside for a second, what else existed before? If you wanted to believe that line of thinking, which again I emphasize is false, but let's just pretend for a minute it's not. Then what else was given before the law was given? The Shabbat, the Holy Sabbath, which of course is the seventh day. So if you're going to say tithing is legit and we should do that, then why don't you say the Shabbat is legit and we should do that? I know. See, my problem is I believe in consistency based on truth and rational thinking, and that is not exactly popular. I get it, but I'm just asking. Of course, it's not true. Galatians. Whew, that was a Freudian. Genesis is actually part of the law of Moses, and therefore tithing is not before the law, and neither, of course, is Shabbat before the law, because nothing existed before the law. The universe that Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock tour around in all the time did not exist before the law, because in fact, the law of God, that is the law of Moses, that is the Holy Torah, was the tool with which God created the universe. Good morning, Zake and Yagal. How are you today? Good morning, Thomas. Good morning to you. Good morning, Devora. Hope you're doing well. Good morning, Peaches. Good morning, Haas, there in Oregon. Good morning, Brenda. Good morning, Marita. Hope you're doing well. Windy. It was windy here yesterday, particularly last evening. It was super windy. Clayton, good morning to you from Helena, Arkansas. Arkansas is a pretty state. Rebstein and I almost moved there once, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Good morning, Chris. Crystal. Good morning, Corin. We so want to come to see you guys in Europe. Anyway, that's that's for another conversation. Roy, good morning. Good morning, Nellie Grace. Good morning, Leah. Good morning. Hope you're doing well. Chanel, good morning. Bonjour. Good morning, Luis. How is Missouri treating you? Who else do we have? I jumped the thing here on my little thing. There it is. Gianna, good morning, Gianna. Hope you're doing good. Katura, good morning to you. Good morning, Salamain. Hope you're doing fantastic. Good morning, Levi, Eliezer, Sergio, Shoshana, Realm Warriors. Good morning to you. Radomir is am I pronouncing it? Radomir. Good morning. Good day. From Scotland. Hava, good morning. Isaac, good morning. The Rebbe scene. Oh. Melanie, good morning. Good morning to you, Melanie. Hope you're doing fantastic. Chase, hey Chase. You were the star of the latest short that was just uploaded. Yeah, you're welcome. So check it out. Did I say good morning, Ahava? I hope I did. Jonathan de la Paz. Buenos dias, señor. Generalissimo de la Paz. Good morning. Who else? Clayton, I think I mentioned you already. Ami, good morning. Sarah, Johanna, good morning. And fantastic. I think that's everybody. So great. All right. So good to see you all this morning. Let's jump right into our insights. Hope everybody's doing fantastic. And let's look at Rabbi Trugman, who is giving us a little insight into the Holy Shabbat. So he points out that in Tisa, that this contains the Torah's longest or lengthiest discussion of the Holy Shabbat. It provides, as he says here, a lot of textual material for the Shabbat prayers and for the Kiddush. In fact, indeed, we get we receive our statement from the Amidav Shabbat with respect to the Shabbat from this Torah portion, which we'll talk about here in just a second. Good morning, Lynn. Hope you're doing fantastic. Yeah, Kristen actually, I was asking about the rod that of Moses that he found in the garden. The insights bring down that originally that rod did belong to Adam. I don't know about having the Torah inscribed on it, but it did have the 10 plagues inscribed on it, as well as the name of HaShem. So anyway, Rabbi Trugman says, in this section, the people of Israel are warned not to desecrate the Shabbat. For anyone who does so is liable to receive the death penalty and have his or her soul cut off from among the people. Now, once again, just really quickly here, because this is going to be a constant battle, but we get comments on the channel all the time saying things such as, do you still stone your children? How come you don't sacrifice in the temple? A lot of hateful things, by the way, but that just goes with the territory. It's a lot of anti-Semitism comes from the letter writer, and that's why these people are anti-Semitic. It's not really their fault, actually. It's just kind of the poison that's in their veins. I posted a picture of Rebbetzin and I at the Kotel at the in the Western Wall, and somebody quoted and said, "Well, did you sacrifice there?" At that kind of stuff. And listen, you got to take that kind of stuff in stride. I feel sorry for them because they're actually blaspheming God, not me. You can't blaspheme me because I'm not God. Just like I can't blaspheme Paul because he's not God. Wait, what? Somebody said yesterday that if I didn't accept Paul, then I was going to have a hard time in the kingdom of heaven because I wouldn't be sitting at the right hand of God, which I guess means that Paul is the one who decides who sits at the right or who sits at the left. But anyway, I digress. So, the fact of the matter is, going back to this thought here, is that we're not allowed to desecrate the Shabbat according to HaShem. So it says here there's a death penalty if you do, but some of the other things that come through people is just the general line of thinking that before Messiah, that Jews just ran around killing everybody. If we saw you breaking the Shabbat, if you turned your flat screen TV on Shabbat, then we took you out behind the woodshed of Capernaum and we just stoned you right to death. And listen, this is part of that straw man argument. You have to create the perception that it was that life under the law was the wild, wild west. It was absolute anarchy. It was death and dismal destruction. It was just mean-spirited legalism that everybody was like, ugh. And, if you violated the law, you were done. We would just throw you off of a cliff and just, ugh. And all that, of course, is, say it with me, phony baloney, plastic banana, good time rock and roll. None of that is true. As it turns out, there was all kinds of due process when you actually study ancient Jewish law, and people rarely ever got sentenced or condemned to death. In fact, it says in ancient Jewish literature that if a Sanhedrin, and by the way, it would require a Sanhedrin, at least a Sanhedrin Katan, a small Sanhedrin of 21, you had to at least have, at very least, 21 judges to put anyone to death, anyone at all. And by the way, just as a reminder, no one was eligible for the death penalty unless you were at least 20 years old. Okay, that's important to know. So no children were stoned to death. But anyway, in ancient Jewish literature, it's written that if a Sanhedrin sentenced anyone to death in a 7-year period, they were considered a bloodthirsty Sanhedrin. In other words, anyone getting the death penalty was like super rare. You might ask yourself the question, if that's true, then why did the Sanhedrin sentence the Messiah to death? Answer, now you can tell yourself, they didn't. What? Yeah, listen, First of all, it wasn't the Sanhedrin, number one, because they were meeting at Caiaphas' house at night. Now, Sanhedrin is 71 judges. I can tell you right now, even the biggest house in ancient Israel by the wealthiest person couldn't hold 71 people. But even so, you're not allowed to have court in somebody's living room. You have to have it at the chamber of hewn stone, number one. Number two, you can tell yourself, Caiaphas was bought and paid for by the Roman government. That's a historical fact. Just read Josephus. He was absolutely a puppet of Rome. So all he was doing was Rome's bidding. So they didn't. The fact of the matter is that no one got put to death in Israel, rarely ever. But even if you were charged with something that could lead to the death penalty, there was all kinds of due process, much of which was designed to get you off the proverbial hook. But it doesn't change the fact that the Sabbath itself is critically important. And this is why Jewish people have always been super careful to observe the Shabbat. Okay. So he says that this, in fact, is one of the many infractions in the Torah that incurs the death penalty, and being cut off. However, due to strict laws regarding valid evidence, even when the Sanhedrin ruled the land, the death penalty was rarely carried out. This is what Rabbi Trugman is just basically affirming what I just said. So, if so, what meaning can these extreme punishments have? During the period of the Sanhedrin, they had a deterrent effect. And at other times, when no Jewish court was authorized to mete out such punishments, they served to underline the seriousness of these infractions. So you can imagine, I want you to think about this for a second. Utilize your brain. So for centuries, for thousands of years, according to the very word of God, the word that came out of God's very mouth, Jews have understood the critical importance of the Shabbat, why we need to be keeping it, and the severe consequences, spiritual or otherwise, if we do not. And we believe that because God said it. Okay. And then along comes a man who writes a handful of letters telling us that the Messiah has come, the Christ has come. And one of the things that he's done is he's completely and totally abolished the Shabbat. And now we should not keep it. And if we do, then we are in violation of the words of this aberration that this letter writer allegedly saw. And then people are shocked and dismayed when we Jews, with respect, laugh that away. as if you're a nutcase. In the same way, by the way, that Christians laugh away Joseph Smith's aberrations he allegedly had, and they don't accept the Book of Mormon. For the same reasons that Christians don't accept the Book of Mormon, we Jews don't accept Paul. Do I need to say that again? For the same reason that Christians don't accept the Book of Mormon, we don't accept Paul's letters. For the same reason. Wait, what? Well, because the Book of Mormon contradicts Christian scriptures. And the letter writer's letters contradict the Gospels and the Tanakh. So there you go. So when you tell a Jew that God, that allegedly I got this vision from God privately, and I went out in the desert, got this vision, and he wants me to tell you to stop keeping the Sabbath, we Jews look at that person and go, yeah, no, thanks. And there's a good reason. So Rashi, Rabbi Truman says, Rashi explains the words desecrate and mundane share the same Hebrew word. Hebrew root, sleek up. Thus, one who abuses the holiness of the day by continuing to perform mundane activities desecrates the holy Shabbat, the holiness, that is, the holiness of the day. Okay. By continuing to perform mundane activities, which desecrates the Shabbat. Okay. Just understand that when we do mundane things, when we do things that are not indicative to the Shabbat, we are thereby desecrate the Shabbat. Okay. The Slonimer Rebbe explains that the root word for desecrate also denotes creating a vacuum or empty space. It follows, he says, that one who ignores the Shabbat's holiness, treating it as just another day, creates a hole, as it were, in the very fabric of Shabbat. So basically, when we desecrate the Shabbat by doing what we want, whatever we want to do, whatever that is, things that are not appropriate, we create a black hole, sucking the life out of the Holy Sabbath. This empty space becomes dead space, for which the death penalty is symbolically inflicted. Not only is the punishment measure for measure, it is self-inflicted. A lot of people believe that the law of Moses was too hard to keep, therefore you can't do it. My response to that is, find me a law in the law of Moses that was too hard to keep. The one that applied to you, of course, right? If you're a man, you can't keep Torah laws that relate to women. Okay, obviously, right? But seriously though, find me a commandment in the Torah that was like, oh my gosh, there's no way we could have done that. He's asking us to just jump off the Empire State Building without a parachute and fly, to Arkansas, and that's just insane. Yeah, there's no law like that, by the way. There's no law that's too hard you can't keep it. There just isn't, right? You can't find one. So it says, in the portion of Noah, we discussed how our thoughts, speech, and actions affect our experience on Shabbat. That's true. Shabbat's quality is lessened when people who refrain from all forbidden labors on Shabbat still allow their speech and thoughts to remain on mundane level. That's true as well. We have to really guard our thoughts and guard our speech and so forth on the Shabbat to make sure that our speech, our conversation is not, we're not talking about mundane things. We don't need to be talking about work. We don't need to be talking about problems. We don't need to be talking about future things. Well, Monday I'm going to do this. Tuesday I'm going to do that. We need to put all that aside, which, by the way, is harder actually than ceasing from work. It says the Slonimer Rebbe explains that each thought, speech, or act not in keeping with the day's holiness creates a spiritual hole that slowly eats away at the animating life force of the Shabbat, leaving an inner dead space. Boy, that's so true. This is why on our website, lapidjudaism.org, we have the table sparks. The purpose of the table sparks is just to spark conversation at the Shabbat table so that we don't get into discussions of mundane things. We don't be talking about worldly things, things that are not holy, not pertinent to the Shabbat. So it says people who introduce the mundane into the Shabbat not only further cut their souls off from the rest of the nation celebrating the holiness of the day, but also even more significantly cut themselves off from their own spiritual roots. They reject consciously or unconsciously the erroneous opportunity inherent in experiencing the bliss and inner peace of the Shabbat. And a lot of this is just the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara is very cunning. The Yetzer Hara does not want you to enjoy the spiritual nature of the Holy Sabbath. The law of Moses, the Torah, is deeply spiritual, which is why the Satan worked so hard to make sure that you abandon it. The last thing the Satan wants you to do is keep the Holy Sabbath. No way. Now let's look at the Mekilta. Let's look at this again. The Mekilta is the oldest Midrash there is, and it happens to be a Midrash that is based upon the book of Exodus. So it says, this is the Mekilta, Tractate Shabbatai, chapter 1, relating to Exodus chapter 31, verses 12 through 17. And the Lord spoke unto Moses directly and not through the medium of an angel or a messenger. We talked about this yesterday. Paul, let me soften this a little bit. Paul failed to express the truth when he said that the law of God was given through an angel. That is, of course, blatantly false. And the Mekilta brings this out, that the Torah of God, the law of God, came vis-a-vis God. Okay? Verily, you say, you shall keep the Sabbath. Why is this said? Because it said, you shall not do any manner of work, Exodus 20, verse 10, from which I know only about the activities that can be regarded as labor. But how about activities that can be regarded as merely detracting from the restfulness of the Shabbat? Scripture says here, verily you shall keep my Sabbaths, thus prohibiting even such activities as only detract from the restfulness of the Sabbath day. A long time ago, I was reading an insight, and a rabbi was talking about that somebody was walking home on Shabbat, and they observed that there was a portion of their fencing that needed to be repaired. And the person made a comment that tomorrow I shall repair that or whatever. And the rabbi said that was a violation of the Shabbat. You shouldn't be thinking about mundane things like what you're going to do tomorrow or what have you. You should keep your mind focused. Now, some may see that as extreme. I don't personally, but some may. Well, isn't that kind of extreme? No, it's not, because see, you're automatically, when you look at that and you start thinking about that, well, let's see, I'll fix that tomorrow, which means I've got to go to the hardware store and get some wood. I got to get some nails, and I think if I cut that, I'll be able to put that. See, now your mind has just gone off on a rant, thinking about the mundane activity of work, which you'll do tomorrow. Meanwhile, you're abandoning the Shabbat. That's why you have to be so careful. That's the point. You have to be careful. So it says here, once Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, and Rabbi Akiva were walking along the road, followed by Levi the net maker, and Ishmael the son of Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, and the following question was discussed by them. Whence do we know that the duty of saving life supersedes the Sabbath law? Now, I just got through telling you that this Mekilta is the oldest Midrash extant. And here the idea of life over law is being discussed. Okay. Which, by the way, is to a large extent the conflict that Yeshua had with some of the Jewish teachers of the law. In the first century, there was this debate on whether or not this was true. Okay. The Pharisees, certain sects of them anyway, believed that saving a life or protecting life superseded all the laws, and others did not. And that was the debate going on. It was an inter-Jewish debate. Okay. So whence do we know that the duty of saving a life supersedes the Sabbath laws? Rabbi Ishmael, answering the question, said, behold, it is said, if a thief be found breaking in, Exodus 22:1. Now, what case does the law speak? Of what case does the law speak? Of a case when there is a doubt whether the burglar came merely to steal or even to kill. Now, by using the method of kal v'chomer, it is to be reasoned, even shedding of blood, which defiles the land and causes the Shekinah to remove from it, is to supersede the laws of the Shabbat, if it is to be done in protecting one's life. How much more should the duty of saving life supersede the Sabbath laws? So you can defend yourself on the Shabbat. And if you can defend yourself, in other words, in defending yourself, presumably you're taking a life. You're only doing it because your life is at stake. If that's true, how much more true then, kal v'chomer, how much more true is it to save a life on the Holy Sabbath, right? Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, answering the question, said, if in performing the ceremony of circumcision, which affects only the member of the body, one is to disregard the Sabbath laws, meaning that what that means is if the child was in fact born on a Shabbat, you can in fact perform the circumcision on the following Shabbat, which would be the 8th day. So if that's true, it says, how much more should one do for the whole body when it's in danger? So in other words, if you can perform the circumcision on the Holy Sabbath without violating the Sabbath, then you should be able, and you're only in that case saving the one member, then you should be able to also save the whole body on the Holy Sabbath. That's the argument that is being made here. The Pharisees, and with God's help, I intend to talk about the Pharisees this coming Shabbat, which I'm sure will go viral because it's completely opposite of everything people have learned in church about the Pharisees, okay? Which, by the way, is the plan of the Satan for good reason from his point of view. But the thing about the Pharisees is, contrary to the propaganda, they were very lenient in their observance of the law of Moses. I'll explain more of that on Shabbat, but this is one of those observations. It says, the sages, however, said to him, from the instant cited by you, it would also follow that just as there, the Shabbat is to be disregarded only in the case of certainty, so also here the Shabbat is to be disregarded only in a case of certainty. Rabbi Akiva said, if punishment for murder sets aside even the temple service, which in turn supersedes the Sabbath, how much more should the duty of saving life supersede the Sabbath? So again, they're arguing that to save a life, to protect a life, all these things supersede the laws. Rabbi Yosei, the Galilean, says, when it says, but my Sabbath you shall keep, the word but implies a distinction. There are Sabbaths on which you must rest, and there are Sabbaths on which you should not rest, okay? So he says here, Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh says, behold, it says, you shall keep the Sabbath, for it is holy unto you. This means the Sabbath is given to you, but you are not surrendered to the Sabbath. Sounds very familiar, right? What Yeshua says. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. It almost sounds like he's quoting directly from the Mekilta. This means the Shabbat is given to you, but you are not surrendered to the Sabbath. Rabbi Nathan says, behold, it says, wherever the children of Israel shall keep the Shabbat to observe the Shabbat throughout their generations. Bnei Yisrael et Shabbat le'asot et Shabbat le'dorotam ha'olam. This implies that we should disregard one Sabbath for the sake of saving the life of a person, so that person may be able to observe many Sabbaths. That's the point. So we're gonna disregard the Shabbat in this instance only because we're saving a life, but we're doing that so that that life can keep the Shabbat for generations. La'asot et Shabbat ledorotam. For it is a sign between me and you, but not between me and the nations of the world. So this is why the nations don't want to keep the Sabbath, because the Sabbath is a sign between the nation of God and HaShem. So listen, Ezekiel says in 3 places that the Messiah is going to come, take out our heart of stone and give us a heart of flesh. And as a result, and by the way, fill us with his spirit. And as a result, we will be moved to follow the commandments. Well, that says 3 times in Ezekiel, it says that. So my question is that since that's the case, if you claim to have been born again, and if you claim to be filled with the Spirit of God, and if you claim to know the Messiah, but yet the result given there, meaning you have not been moved to keep the laws of Moses, do you really have what you believe you have? Because see, according to the prophet Ezekiel, having those things will not can result, not might result, not usually, not 9 times out of 10, but it will result in you being moved to keep the commandments of God. If that hasn't happened, then it begs the question, do you really have those things? I'm not judging you. I'm asking you to ask yourself that. And here it's saying that the Sabbath is a sign between me and you. So if you don't have the Shabbat, therefore you don't have the sign, do you really have him? Because you say, well, it's just a sign. It's really meaningless. No, it's not. God said it had a lot of meaning. He even said that the Shabbat is a sign that I'm with you and you're with me. So therefore, if you don't have the sign, what does that say? What does that say? Throughout their generations, this law should obtain throughout the generations. That means forever. The Sabbath will never be done away with. That's why when somebody comes, and this applies, by the way, generally to the entire law of Moses. This is why when somebody comes along and says the law's been abolished, or whatever word salad you want to use, basically, you don't have to keep the law anymore because of XYZ, whatever your XYZ is. As a Jew who knows the Bible, we already know you're lying. What? No. The Messiah came. Doesn't matter. Why? Because God said the law will be for all eternity. It says that I can't tell you how many times in the scriptures. And it even says in Deuteronomy 13 that if somebody comes along and does great miracles, raises the dead, I mean, come on, pulls the rabbit out of the hat. Even if he does that and tells you to walk away from the law of Moses, I'm telling you that he's a liar. I sent him to test you to see if your hearts would follow him or me. That's what God said. So therefore, when you come along and say, well, you don't have to do the law of Moses anymore. You don't have to circumcise. It's circumcision of the heart now, not the flesh, which, by the way, circumcision of the heart comes from the Torah. You don't do that anymore. We already know you're lying. It's not even hard. We're not like, I wonder if he's lying. It's just like, no, you're lying. Why? Because God said the exact opposite. So one last thing we'll conclude here because we're out of time. Always out of time, never out of content. But one last thing from the Mekilta. And this is not the last thing on this topic from the Mekilta, just the last thing I have time to share. That you may know. Now, why is this said? Because it said, wherefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, from which I might understand that the deaf and dumb, the insane and the minor are also included in this commandment. Therefore, it says that you may know. So I must interpret it as speaking only of such persons as have understanding, and that I am the Lord who sanctifies you in the future world, which is characterized by the kind of holiness possessed by the Sabbath of this world. We thus learn that the Sabbath possesses a holiness like that of the future world. That's why the sages say when you enter into the Sabbath, you enter into the Olam Haba. And thus it says a song for the Shabbat day, referring to the world in which there is a Sabbath for all time. And you shall keep the Sabbath because it is holy to you. This is the verse which Rabbi Simon, the son of Manasseh, interpreted saying, the Sabbath is given to you, but you are not surrendered to the Shabbat. In other words, the Shabbat is a gift to you. It's a gift to bestow holiness on you. End of our Aliyah today. Thank you so much for being a part of the Aliyah today. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Until then, have a great and amazing day. Shalom Aleichem, and let's work on our Sabbath keeping and improve it this coming Shabbat. Shalom Aleichem.